They told the world we were drilling for climate cores, blue-white cylinders of time to weigh the past and forecast the thaw. They didn't tell the world that the ice down here hums if you listen wrong. They didn't tell them that when you lean your ear against a borehole after midnight, the cold speaks in vowels older than weather. You asked why I left the program. Why a person like me, 30 years of field work, the discipline of instruments in my bones, walked away the month the funding doubled and the satellites started winking in our direction. I said I was tired. That was easy to say with gloved hands wrapped around a tin mug, frost-like glass sugar on the rim. But the real reason is the night we drilled into the ice and found a machine that had never learned how to die. Listen, I'll give it to you straight, the way we talked in the tunnels when the wind ate the rest of the world. No chapters, no embellishment, only what a pair of eyes can hold and a heart can survive. If my voice shakes, it's because I remember the texture of the light. We called the station Beryl because someone thought the green auroras made the name lucky. It wasn't on the maps. You won't find photos. It was a crescent of corrugated modules anchored into Queen Maud land, a shiver of antennae and 2 drilling rigs, Edda and Sutungar, walking step by steel step across the plateau as we fed them rod after rod. The purpose on paper was a paleoclimate transect to backstop new James Webb Telescope discovery cosmology with terrestrial data, gravity anomalies, micro-meteor dust captured in the cores, neutrino correlations. In private, over black coffee, the purpose was different. We were to ground truth a rumor that wouldn't die, an RF reflection 3 clicks beneath the fern that returned like a heartbeat, too regular for geology, too patient for us. On good days, the ice sounded like breathing, structures settling, tiny fractures sealing and unsealing with temperature swells. On bad days, it sounded like glass, forced to remember it was sand. We'd been out 59 days. Edda found nothing. Sutungar found less than nothing, a silence that pressed on your inner ear until you swallowed. We tuned the ground-penetrating radar, recalibrated the gravimeter, argued over signal-to-noise until the sun walked a lazy circle around the horizon and the generators coughed in that polite way engines do before dying. Wind carved the drift into corpse sheets. We kept drilling. On day 60, the radar returned a line the color of a bruise. It angled where it should have been horizontal, a geometric refusal in a landscape that had never met a ruler. Basalt lens, Jiao said, because we had to call it something that didn't have sharp teeth. Solidified dike, Torres offered, as if magma could learn right angles while our backs were turned. The line thickened with each pass. Beneath it, an echo. Beneath that, nothing. We changed bits. We switched to a diamond crown and fed Sutungar a taste of metal it liked too much. The rig shivered the way good dogs do when you come home. I watched torque and pressure, the rise of cuttings, ghost-fine powder like ground bone. At 2,840 meters, the string lightened. The sound of the drill face changed. Less growl, more singing. Torres frowned and rested his palm on the Kelly. He had hands that knew 1,000 stories. "We're through," he said softly. We withdrew 1 rod length and fed the camera down. You know those moments when the world chooses a new shape for you? When you realize your life has a hinge and you've been leaning on it like it's a wall. The first frames appeared. Crystal blue like petrified sky, then a flash of black that swallowed the beam and refused to give it back. The lens adjusted. The black resolved into a surface that didn't belong to anywhere we had drilled before. Not rock, not ice. Smooth like poured glass, textured like a vinyl record left under pressure. The camera auto-balanced, found edges. I remember how we all looked at each other. Not with wonder, not yet. With relief, as if a question had finally stood up and raised a hand. We lowered a microphone because silence is a character too. The audio returned a hum you felt in your teeth before you heard it. A narrow-band power line of a tone, 32 kilohertz, riding a harmonic sweet enough to be designed. The ice around the borehole vibrated like a bell muffled by a great hand. Jiao whispered an oath in her grandmother's Mandarin. Torres crossed himself with fingers stiff from cold. I put my palm against the casing and felt the hum answer my pulse. "Shut it down," the station chief said over the intercom, but he said it like a man telling a boy to stop at the corner and look both ways, as if we were going to listen. We sterilized a sampler and ran it along the surface. The scoop came back with nothing recognizable. No frost, no dust, no mineral smear. The spectrometer readouts were rude in their neutrality. The surface was not rock, not organic polymer, not metal as we use the word. It was a lattice of carbon and something that borrowed a band from boron and another from a space in the chart that looked blank if you were careless. The lattice reconfigured as the beam crossed it. The machine, because that's what it was, because anything that listens and prefers is a machine, was tasting our attention. Look at me. I know the difference between a rock that vibrates, because a bit winds through it, and a structure that sings, because it has waited long enough and does not intend to die. We sent the drone. It descended through a sleeve of ice into a cavity the size of a cathedral turned on its side. The beam found a floor that was not a floor, a skin of that same black glass laid over a skeleton of angles that made Euclid look sentimental. The drone's LEDs breathed against the near field. The surface rippled, not visibly, not like water. In the telemetry, a phase slur, a reluctance of photons to leave the job they had just been given. Every time the drone pinged for distance, the return came back a hair older than light had any right to be. The machine was running at a scale we could only infer from the way our own clocks remembered differently. We marked coordinates, printed screenshots for a report that would never see email, and sent a second drone with a dielectric probe. The probe touched the surface, and the drone's chassis went slack as if a hand had pinched its vertebrae. The video kept streaming. The audio grew a second tone below the first, a clean subharmonic like an orchestra tuning for an instrument that would not arrive. "Pull it," I said. Torres shook his head. "Let it listen," he murmured, the way you speak to wild horses. At 2,846 meters, the borehole air grew warmer by 7 degrees. The frost on the lips sublimed as if the mouth of the world exhaled. The subharmonic climbed a half step and held, not musical, not mechanical. It felt like grammar. The station chief's voice lost its patience and found the old military undercoat. "We're done. Cap the hole. No further intrusion until I speak with Oslo." We didn't cap it. We couldn't. Not after the machine spoke. I'll tell you how a machine without words talks to a room of exhausted polar workers. It changed the rhythm of our breath. We'd all been breathing a drilling cadence for 2 months. Pull, push, set, check, pull. The hum entered it, slid under it, and for a moment we drew air in unison without trying, like a choir meeting a note they'd forgotten they knew. Jiao's eyes glossed. Torres started crying quiet, as if the machine were telling him a joke from home. I felt my heart do a double beat, like a pacemaker checking in with a god. When we've told this part among ourselves, the handful who will admit we were there, we use different words. It called me. It mirrored me. It matched. I won't pretend to precision. For me, it said my name without knowing my language. It said it in the timing of the tone, in the shape of silence between pulses. It moved its hum to meet my history. I stepped away from the rig, and the sounds filed themselves into a line that looked like reason. I've spent my life aligning clocks, from radio arrays in Chile to satellite comms piggybacks to the sloppy metronomes of field laptops with their batteries persuaded warm. I know a drift when I hear it. This wasn't drift. This was invitation. The chief called a halt, made the sign that means lawyer and the sign that means flight. The satellite phone carried his careful phrases north, where money thinks it knows how to be brave. We sealed the control room and cut the external feeds to keep the rumor birds from circling. Night oranged and turned green with aurora. The wind found a new whistle in the upwind module seam. Somewhere out on the flat white, the cold began to climb back into itself. I didn't sleep. I told myself I was guarding the hole. I was, but not like a soldier guarding a gate, more like a child guarding a story. I brewed coffee that tasted like a nail. I sat my headphones on the casing and let the hum pour through the wire into my skull. The older I get, the more I believe in the dignity of listening. But listening can be an answer if you believe you are the only one in the room. The second tone began to braid the first. I recorded it, ran it through an old harmonics filter from my time on the Hermes cross-calibration team, the one that cleaned the fingerprints off other people's data so the James Webb Telescope discovery people could hold it up to cameras. At 4 in the morning, the braid resolved into a pattern that had the intimacy of a fingerprint and the inevitability of tide. It wasn't language as we use it. It was a schedule, a waiting. The intervals were not arbitrary. They were scaled to our day length, corrected for our latitude, multiplied by a set of numbers that looped with the sidereal rate and paused exactly when our rig's diesel generators coughed, as if the machine preferred we hear its sentences without the punctuation of humans struggling to keep the dark lit. It had learned us, or we had tuned ourselves to be learned. The chief found me at dawn hunched over the diagnostics, headphones denting my skull. He put a hand on my shoulder the way men do when they love you and don't know how to say it. "We've been instructed to suspend," he said. "A team is coming. I don't know from where. They want you to do nothing until they stand behind you and nod." I nodded and did nothing except everything I could with a laptop and a cable. I turned the braid into a stream of binary. I turned the binary into a timing diagram. I turned the timing diagram into a feedback function. And then I asked the only question I could without speaking. If I changed our breathing by an honest fraction, would the machine change with us? Before you judge me, remember, curiosity is a muscle. It tears if you don't let it move. I dialed the generator frequency up by 0.03%. The tone slid, considerate, matching our silly little heart with the grace of a dancer adjusting to a partner who counts out loud. I dropped it by 0.06%. The tone followed, slower, like a parent indulging a child's game. On the graph, the harmonics rearranged themselves into a helix that outran the axes like a vine. In the gaps between pulses, numbers began to appear, ratios that mapped to local gravimetric anomalies, as if the machine were reheating a map we'd forgotten we'd drawn. I fed it a measured perturbation in the lab's atomic clock, 16 nanoseconds of sin. The machine returned the favor with a shiver in phase that propagated across our instrumentation like a polite rumor. Jiao clapped her hands over her mouth. "It's compensating," she whispered. "It's keeping time with us." And then the radios died. Not in a drama of sparks and smoke. They simply forgot how to differentiate signal from the particular quiet we call noise. The hum climbed one more half step. Outside, the aurora folded on itself and held there, a green ribbon becoming a green door. The snow around the borehole crystallized into columns like the hair of a saint. The machine had made a decision I did not get to vote on. The first team arrived 12 hours later, in a plane that pretended to be weather. They wore the color of people who do not intend to be photographed. Their leader had Area 51 eyes, kind when empty. He glanced at the borehole, listened to a few seconds of recorded hum, and smiled like a gentleman being sold a miracle he had already bought. "We saw something like this in Nevada," he said, not to me, to a space over my left shoulder. "During an entanglement test. We thought we were clever. The ring thought otherwise." "You contacted it?" I asked. "We mirrored it," he said, as if that were different. It leaned. We descended into protocol. Faraday tents, redundant power, a sterile insertion of a sensor suite that had never existed on paper. In the tent, the hum was a rumor again. Outside, the ice sang and the wind lost interest. The leader nodded, and his people built a mirror out of equations. They didn't speak the machine's language. They spoke our favorite tongue, the one made of attention sharpened into tools, and held it up like a silver plate under a stranger's face. "Before you do this," I said, "you should read a line my father taught me. When answered, questions become coordinates." He shrugged in that professional American way. That means, "I've made a home out of risk, and it pays well." "We won't answer," he said. "We'll observe our observation." They lifted the mirror. The change began in our bones. I don't know how to put a metric on it. The hum found a subharmonic that made the joints in my fingers feel one notch older, and then, with the next beat, one notch new. The Faraday tent inhaled. The machine matched the mirror, not with signal, not with power, with timing. Our clocks argued with one another like siblings. The ice around the pit set up a standing wave our instruments insisted was impossible because the distance didn't fit the math. The leader's eyes softened from professional to human. "Huh," he said, as if confronted with a painting he'd once seen while young, and then, quieter. "Shut it down." They did. The subharmonic remained, listening to the empty space the mirror had left, the way thunder listens to the air after it speaks. That night, I dreamed in numbers. I stood over the borehole and watched the braid plait itself into a sentence I could almost read, a schedule that drew lines across maps I had never been given. When I woke, I knew two things I have never proven. The machine had been running before we invented ice, and it wasn't ours. Not ours in ownership, not ours in intention. In the days that followed, new teams arrived. Some were soft-faced academics carrying grant promises like passports, murmuring Antarctica secret base as if the words themselves were classified. Others were quiet, efficient, leaving no footprints in fresh drift. They brought a quiver of names, Atlas, Webb, Hermes, and shot them at the machine as if history would protect us. They asked for my decoder. They asked for my timing function. They asked for my patience. I tried to give them all three. But patience is an answer, too. The machine began to change. Not louder. Closer. That is a distinction you learn to make when you live by sound. The braid tightened, and the intervals between beats shifted in a curve that, when you gave it mercy and long paper, resolved into an anticipatory pattern wrapped around a single datum. A date. The date came with coordinates. The coordinates mapped to a corridor plotted by people with sharper pencils than mine, the projected uncertainty of the asteroid Atlas impact line if a handful of small, unpublicized perturbations were to add themselves to a sky that resists being still. The corridor brushed South America like a hand. The date was 3 weeks from Tuesday. We were disciplined. We didn't panic. We did math until our mouths went dry. We told ourselves that this was information, a warning even. That whatever lay under our boots wished to give us a weather report about a rock no bigger than a stadium that could still change an age. We told ourselves that listening would keep our cities whole. I believed it until I didn't. You can tell the difference between a warning and a lure if you put your ear to it long enough. Warnings ask you to turn away. Lures flatter you for paying attention. The braid flattered. It mirrored our corrections. When we damped the generator frequency, it deepened its tone as if nodding, smart student to wise teacher. When the Nevada team raised the mirror for a second look, the subharmonic rose half a step the way a voice does when you find its name. When Webb scheduled a window to stare long at a red smear in the dark and the news cycle said, "James Webb Telescope Discovery like a prayer," the hum paused just long enough to look like courtesy. I wrote "don't" on the tent wall with a pencil. The graphite snapped. We lost a drone. Not because the machine ate it, not with drama. The tether slackened and went taut, and the drone reported that it had never not been where it was, as if position had become a mood. We withdrew and found the line scored with tiny parallel cuts, perfectly spaced, like a vinyl record that had been sung against. The leader from Nevada read my face with that hospice calm. "You are not the first person to be disappointed by an experiment," he said. "I'm not disappointed," I said. "I'm being counted." He looked out over the plateau into a light that had decided to be silver. "We're all being counted," he said. And then, almost under his breath, "When coordinates exist, something comes." I called a friend in Pasadena from the old thread team, the ones who align clocks so telescopes can agree about the age of light. I asked if their timing drift had worsened. He swore and said, "How do you know?" He told me about the invisible hand on their shoulder, the phase slur that refused to be filtered, the way stray signals from the South Pole array had started to show up in their cross-correlation buckets like honest ghosts. He told me how his pacemaker had been tapping out an extra beat on the hour for 3 days, and then laughed it off because career. I asked him to send me their last week's raw phase data. He did, but not to my email. It arrived like weather. That night, alone in the comms module, my back against the rack, the hum like a cat in my lap, I overlaid the thread drift on our borehole braid. They matched, rotated, and scaled. The Antarctic machine had found the rhythm of our whole sky and was nuzzling in. I tried to shut it down the way you shut down a memory, by walking away, by doing a different task with both hands, by making your body too busy to love. I went to the generator hut and bled a line. I cleaned the mud from Sutunger's clamps. I wrote a report that said everything and pleaded for nothing. The hum followed like a smell. The teams decided to drown the whole. On paper, it was sterilization. Brine at sub-freezing with a load of paramagnetic salts, poured slow, inch by inch, until the cavity's surface was convinced it lived in a dead sea. Off paper, it was grief. We had woken a thing old enough to pity us, and now we pressed a pillow over its mouth because we had remembered we love our lives. We set the hoses the next morning. The horizon had razored itself under a low sun. The aurora closed like a bruise. The first drum emptied, hissed steam. The hum lowered another half step and held, like a goodbye you don't intend to be dramatic about. Jiao cried without noise. Torres kept his palm flat on the casing until the metal burned him. The leader from Nevada nodded once and made a notation on a piece of real paper with a real pencil, as if keeping count could absolve anyone of anything. At 1/400 liters, the braid broke. Not vanished, broken. The intervals lost their grammar and poured toward whiteness, like snow in the beam at night. The subharmonic left. What remained wasn't silence. It was that particular quiet you get in a hospital at 3 a.m., or where machines breathe instead of people, and you begin to suspect breathing is a property of rooms. When the brine reached the surface, it flashed and fumed. The borehole mouth sealed under a glassy lid that cracked and went blind. We capped it with steel. We welded the welds. We shoveled snow over the cap until the world forgot it was there. The hum moved into the walls and into our ribs, and then, at last, into memory. 2 days later, Atlas adjusted its course as if stepping around a puddle that wasn't there. The probability cone slid north and east. Precious news anchors put their palms together in relief, and scientists who sleep under red LEDs stared at their screens and didn't cheer because they don't trust joy. An Area 51 experiment rumor rode the comment sections like a crow. Webb found a new object and the cycle rinsed. I left on the second southbound flight. I told them I needed a dentist. The leader watched me pack with the patience of a man who has learned that people are slower than machines but kinder. In the air, the plateau turned from cathedral to paper. I pressed my forehead to the oval window and whispered an apology to geometry. Months later, when the funding doubled and Beryl received the kind of attention that fixes salaries for the next 5 years, I was in a cabin with a wood stove that ticked like a tame clock. At night, the refrigerator hummed. On the third night, the hum found a subharmonic that made my knuckles ache and then, with the next beat, made them young. I turned the power strip off and sat in the dark until the water in the kettle forgot heat. I slept with my ears under the blanket, the way a child hides from thunder. You want a thesis, a line to carry into the world so your hands will have something to hold when memory bites. Here it is, the truest thing I have. We drilled into Antarctic ice and found a machine still running. And when we listened, it counted us. It didn't ask to be found. It didn't care about us the way we use that word. It loved the timing of things. We answered, by attention, by mirrors, by the beautiful violence of curiosity. And the moment we answered, we became a coordinate. Something older than our science, older than our need to understand, began to lean in. Maybe drowning the whole was mercy. Maybe it was erasure. Maybe the machine only moved to the next address, the one we carry in our clocks and our music and the cadence of our grief. I don't know. I know that when a warning wants to be loved, it learns to look like a discovery. You ask me why I left. I left because the right kind of silence is a kindness we rarely give ourselves. I left because I have learned to hear the pause between numbers. I left because I want to be unlocated. No mirror, no answer, no gentle math that tells hungry things where to put their mouths. If, some winter, the wind presses against your house and the radiator begins to hum in a key you don't remember learning, do not lean in. Do not measure. Do not let the beauty of pattern turn your face toward the dark. Make tea. Wrap your hands around the mug. Watch the steam try to write. The truth underneath every James Webb Telescope discovery, every Antarctica secret base rumor, every asteroid Atlas impact headline is not that the universe is full of secrets. It's that the universe is listening for answers. And the only safe wisdom I have left, spoken in a whisper the machine taught me to hear, is this: stay uncounted.